Have you been considering buying a Nissan 300ZX? Well, look no farther, because we're going to try to cover everything here in this video to help you guys feel comfortable about purchasing your dream Z or your perfect Z, whichever it may be or whichever it may look like. Oddly enough, this is my dream Z. This is my slick top 300ZX. It's twin turbo swapped, and I wouldn't get rid of it for anything. I love this car, and hopefully I can help you guys find the correct car for you. So basically, we got a couple things we're going to go over today. The main thing is vehicle maintenance and service history. The second thing is body and just overall like rust or just body condition, you know. Make sure you got a solid platform or a solid car that's going to last for years to come and that hasn't already been, you know, taken away or starting to be rotted away with salt and rust. Unfortunately, the northern cars have the worst end of the stick of all this. They crust out pretty bad. So enough of the talk. Let's start to show you guys what you should look for. So when looking at a Z32, there's basically a couple fatal flaws to this. And well, that's being a unibody. Nissan didn't do all these cars equal when they made them from the factory. So one car may be sealed great and the other one could have been like a Friday evening car where they just slapped it together and ran out the door. So pretty much the thing that's going to make your Z worth the most is how nice, how OEM, and how original is it. That's going to hold the most value. Garage kept cars are significantly going to be more valued than one that sat outside. And one little reason belonging to the interior, that cluster hood is cracked and that dash is peeling up by the defrost vents. These cars aren't flawed like the Nissan 240SX over here where they just crack looking at them. These actually have dash peel issues versus the dash crack. Honestly, interior wise, that's your biggest thing, is to look up here and up there, because that shows if it's been sitting outside, sitting in the sweltering heat, and if it's been like wilting and drying out the interior. Your driver's seats will about always be worn out there. It's pretty typical. And also your door card, kind of the elbow area. That's what you can expect interior wise, but use your own discretion to check those out. I should mention trunk panels. These corner pieces in the back are often broke by your T-tops when they're sitting in the back. That's as far as interior goes. There's not really a whole lot to them, but as far as the body goes, now this car, I actually redid the full underside so that way it looks nice and fresh. Yeah, that's not what they usually look like. So we've kind of given this thing the whole one over to prevent that rust, to allow it to move on. So they've got a few places they're notorious for rusting at that you always want to check out when buying a Z. One of those is this panel right back in here. This one, surprisingly enough, is actually in pretty good condition, but they will rot out right there at that seam. Once it begins there, it starts down here into your sill panel, and then once that rots out, you're looking into some work, because there's multiple panels all welded together there, and once one of them goes, it spreads to the other. Then you have to repair it correctly with multiple layers of metal, and that gets a little time consuming. Well, we all know how that goes. The radiator supports on these are actually notorious for rusting too. It seems to happen over here in my experience a lot more, but also you can see on this one it's bowed up because some dingbat has lifted it from the radiator support. Don't do that. If your front headlights and stuff is all misaligned, that's likely why. Someone's lifted it from the radiator support, they bowed all this out, and now your hood doesn't sit flush. Like this one's significantly lower than on this side. So we've got a little bit of tweaking to do. You can fix that with a 2x4 and a big hammer. Just straighten it out, pull your front end back down, and you're all good. So if you're there checking the car out, always jump under the car and look at what you can. It's gonna tell you a lot of how it was taken care of. This frame rail right here, this is something you wanna look at underneath the car. Rarely ever is it damaged here in the back, or rusted I should say, but rather here on the front, as you can see, this one has some surface rust and whatnot. It appears it may have been welded and repaired or something at some point, but these are definitely spots that you can check while you're looking at a Z, and it'll help you out significantly. Another big thing, check your pinch weld right here on the bottom. It should be straight. This one wasn't straight, as you can tell it's a little bowed right there. Well, I took some vice grips and straightened it all back out. People notoriously jack the car from these because the factory service manual says to, but it only says to in 2 exact positions in the front and back. Don't be that guy. Also, another really big thing I would look for is just this general subframe contact area, anywhere right back here with seams, that will give you a general idea of the condition of your Z. There's also one more spot on this car that has a tendency to rust out, and that is the battery tray. When battery trays are neglected, that they're under that plastic can begin to rust, and worse, the piece underneath that battery tray that actually goes down into the wheel well can rust out. Because this cowl panel right here often breaks, which is a very sad thing with these. There are reproductions that are made that are sufficient quality, but once this piece right here comes off, all that debris goes down, sits underneath your battery, gets wet, stays moist, and rots out that panel essentially. Now, yeah, this is all just kind of basic stuff for any car. That's kind of just how body things usually are. Front bumpers are notoriously cracked on the lip. That's just part of having a low car. One of the ultimate tests you can do to tell if the car's been wrecked or repainted is to get a magnet. And they actually have certain magnets that help you tell the thickness of the paint. So you can go around, you can test the paint in different spots, see how thick it is. If it's a consistent coat of paint, car's likely never been damaged or had body work done, but if there is a discrepancy, car probably has been wrecked, unfortunately. That really wraps it up body-wise, at least that I can recall. Why would you want to buy a Z? It handles phenomenally, especially in NA form. Not everyone can afford the TT, don't worry. TTs are astronomically priced compared to NAs. NA, you can do it all just the same, just not as fast. You know, you can handle the corners the same. The biggest thing about the Z is falling in love with the handling when you have an underpowered car. Car will take nearly anything you throw at it. I've shredded these. I've daily driven them probably over 160,000 miles now, and they really just hold up to the test every single time. They hug the road, they feel great to drive, they give you the best cockpit experience out of any car that I've ever experienced, and that's why I'm so sold on this car. No other interior has compared, let alone the driving feel of the car, unmatched. Not to mention you're going to be breaking everyone's neck because these cars naturally just bring the eyes on you. Now, as long as you're not driving crazy, that's not a bad thing. Now, should this car be purchased for a daily driver or a first car? Personally, I would say to get something cheaper, something more reliable, so to speak. But then again, that all will come back to reflect on your vehicle's maintenance or service history, which we're going to get onto in a moment. Basically, my first Z, I bought it for like 1,500 bucks, and all it did was get me hooked on the car. I drove it for probably 10 miles, and that was enough to tell me that this was the car that I want to drive. The reason I don't necessarily recommend it for a daily, I do, if you have the money to maintain the car. You need OEM parts to keep this car going at its optimal pace. You don't want to cheap out on lesser brand parts and cause your Z to have all kinds of funky issues. These cars were very, very over-engineered for the time, and honestly, they still are. Those sensors and all those little electronics are very specific. I have plenty of other videos on maintenance and all that other stuff, or what you should use and whatnot. Just feel free to check out any of my following videos down below. If you're looking for your first car, I recommend getting one that's been well taken care of, that has service that's been documented so you know what you're getting into. You're not just getting into like a whole questionable car that may or may not have been beaten on and neglected. Because trust me, it's possible to daily drive these things. I have a daily driver 4-seater in the other garage, and I've driven it probably 25,000 this past year. Not only that, but I would hop in that car and drive it anywhere, and I feel like that's the ultimate goal with these cars. Do I think you should buy it? Absolutely. You might regret it, but you probably won't once you get to drive the car. These cars can be financial mistakes, I'm not gonna lie. It costs a lot to keep them on the road. It can cost a lot to get the right car. So you don't want to ruin your car with cheap parts, basically is what I'm saying. So let's move on to the general maintenance or service history side of this video. There's a few things that plague these cars from the factory that have been fixed over the years. And well, if you're buying an earlier model car, which is very likely because there was way more of them made and they're cheaper, let's be real. So there's non-turbo and there's turbo applications. This is a twin turbo setup. There is literally no room to work on anything anywhere. And you have to take like 25 things off to get to one part. If you're not into that kind of thing, this car is not for you. Now, it definitely can be for you if you're interested in doing maintenance or having maintenance done, so that way you can do some deletes to this car, simplify the engine a little bit, and help make it easier to work on. So this is actually an NA setup. As you can tell, we have significantly more room here to work on this thing. Now keep in mind, all the deletes have been done on both of these cars. So these are in their simplest form, with the exception of a catch can. That really clogs up your bay a little bit. However, fuel injectors, these are a notorious thing for older cars or, you know, early model cars. Basically, your fuel injectors have this square plug that's not like this. This is a new style injector. So this is the one that's been updated. So basically the easiest way to tell here is your actual injector itself. You see this upper one's rounded, the lower one's completely square. Well, it's evident, you can tell what the issue is here. Corrosion. These things are notorious to corrode because these connectors right here are not good at keeping moisture out. They're not sealed. So over time, these things get corroded, they stop working, and your wiring harness starts to get grimed up. Not only is this the fault, you always want to make sure you have new style injectors. Always. 100% recommendation for me every time I buy a Z. These were what they were designed with. This is what they came out in 93 and up. There's a little bit of differences between models, years, makes, and whatnot, but the biggest thing is the coil inside of these injectors. On this one, the coating was not made to withstand ethanol content in fuel. So these worked back in the 90s. Nowadays, we have 10% ethanol. That ethanol eats the coating, shorts the injector out, causes it to stay open or just completely die. So out of nowhere, these can just open up, hydrolock your motor, wash a cylinder out, and totally destroy your motor. Do not keep these old style injectors on your car. Another kind of fatal flaw with the Z is the PTU system. Basically, it's the igniter for the car that controls spark for all of your cylinders. Well, it's usually located right here on your timing cover. So that's where it is from factory. A lot of people relocate it to keep it away from the heat. As you can tell, it's over here, bolted to the cover. Over here on my car, it's actually relocated. I cut the harness back and I've got it tucked over here. Most people sit it under the nose panel, but these are notorious for having that same corrosion problem. I've already updated or upgraded both of my cars, so you're not gonna see it. So basically this is a recalled igniter. They had issues with them to begin with, so they remade them and they updated them with these rounded plugs. So the old ones actually had square plugs, kind of like that injector, except it has 6 and 7 wires with that same square plug with a wire retainer setup. Basically, them things are prone to corrosion, and the corrosion seeps in through the back of the connector, corrodes out your igniter, and then leaves you stranded, gives you all kinds of weird just running issues, misfires, hesitations, or your car just won't run at all. Super common problem. I do have a video on how to bypass that and directly wire them into each other, so you only use these round new style plugs. And as you can see, I've done that here on both of them. That helps eliminate all spark related issues. The other issue with that is just these wiring harnesses in general. These cars are all over 30 years old at this point, at least nearly. These original wiring harnesses, they're not it. They can be if the car was taken care of, but if the car sits outside at all, in the sun on the hood can help promote these injector or any connectors to getting brittle and breaking upon removal. I always recommend putting a new wiring harness in your car. That's just me though, because it takes out so much guesswork and so many just unknowns out of the equation. But then again, I service all my cars. I work on all my Zs. So that's not a big deal for me to pull the engine and change the wiring harness. For you, it's likely a much bigger deal because you just want to drive and enjoy your car. There are a couple systems on the engine itself that I recommend deleting to simplify it. That is an EGR delete, first and foremost. If you're in an emission state, obviously you're not going to really be able to kick this and you got to comply. But at the same time, there is a PRVR, there's a carbon canister, there's AIV valves. These all can be deleted and simplify your engine bay. If not, you're gonna have an extra probably 20 vacuum lines on a twin turbo car, maybe 10 or 15 on an NA car. All the more places to have a vacuum leak or issues. Now, for the biggest unknown or questionable thing for the Nissan 300ZX. The Nissan 300ZX or the VG30 actually has a belt driven timing system, and it has a hydraulic tensioner at that. So basically you want to replace your belt every 60,000 or your water pump and just everything full timing kit every 120,000. In theory, if the car is 30 years old, even if it's got 50,000 miles, it needs the 120K kit done because that does crank, cam seals, water pump. It does all kinds of things that aren't otherwise done in a 60K service. Service intervals were made up for people who drive their cars, not people who park their car in the garage 50 weeks out of the year, you know. Drive your car is basically what I'm saying. It does the best for it than just letting it sit. So these timing belt services can be very intimidating. It's fairly easy to mess up too, especially if you don't know what you're doing or you've never done it before. Luckily, I have a belt guide on my channel that you guys can watch if you're ever wanting to do it yourself and you have questions. I go over it all. I'm an overthinker, so I like to cover all my bases and help you guys out like I would want help if I was looking for it, you know? And the timing belt is a pretty in-depth job. A lot of shops won't work on these cars, so it's usually best to try to find a mechanic for your Z before you buy your Z, because I couldn't tell you how many people I've bought Zs from that had to give up because other shops completely neglected or destroyed their car. It's a sad story, but it's way too common in the Z32 game. And if any of you guys are close to Indiana, I'm about an hour north of Indianapolis. And if there's anything you've seen me do in any of my videos, I can do it for you. And I assure you, it's probably a lot cheaper than what you would pay at like your average shop down the road or whatever. I will treat your Z like my own. Again, these cars are phenomenal to drive. They're unlike any other car that I've experienced to ride in. It's definitely a grand tourer, as they would say. I would drive the world in this car and not have a second thought about it. I hope, maybe a little bit, I have convinced you guys, maybe, if you should or should not pull that trigger on your Nissan 300ZX. If you don't do all your work yourself, make sure you got some deep pockets or if you've got some good friends. I've got all the documentation and all the future videos to help you guys out for anything you may need. So drop that subscribe now if you'd like to stay tuned. This was a spur of the moment video. I've had a few of you guys reaching out to me, asking a few things you should look for if this car is good or X, Y, and Z. And I can't always reply right on time when you guys would like me to. I apologize about that. I try, but there's a lot of you guys sometimes. So hopefully you guys can use this to your advantage and you guys can buy that perfect Z. But I've actually got my car to get ready for the Tail of the Dragon for my trip next month. So we really need to start grinding that thing out. So let's go get to that. Thank you guys again for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.